Good afternoon. Welcome to the 2021 Edinburgh International Book Festival, live from Edinburgh College of Art, part of the University of Edinburgh. My name's Catherine Jones and I'm the Creative Learning Manager here at the Book Festival, and I'm delighted to welcome you today to this event, which is part of the Book Festival's new series of events for the publishing and literature industry, the business of books. Just to do a brief audio description of myself, I am a youngish white woman with kind of shoulder length red hair, and I'm sitting against a very attractive book festival background. To do some housekeeping first, please be aware that this event will be recorded and it'll be uploaded onto the Book Festival's YouTube channel after the event to make it accessible to anybody who couldn't join us live today. To give you a little idea of how the event is going to run, first of all, we're going to have 3 case studies, which are going to whet our appetites and get us ready for the discussion. Then there'll be a kind of 25-minute discussion between myself and the other participants. And then at the end, we're going to have about 20 minutes left for questions from the audience. Please have a look on your screen just now, and there should be a little Q&A box. So that's how you can ask any questions that you'd like to put to the participants at the end of the event. There's also a chat box where my lovely colleague Lola will be chatting to you. So please feel free to introduce yourself, let us know where you're joining us from. Lola will also be posting some links throughout the event, and I'd be really delighted if you're watching this, if you felt that you wanted to share any examples of best practice or organisations or individuals that you think are interesting and relevant, please do that. I really hope this can be an open and honest kind of sharing of ideas. So coming up first, we have a case study from Ailey Finley. Ailey is a sensory storyteller and performer who has worked for many years with people with additional support needs. Over lockdown, she founded My Kind of Book, which creates fun and engaging tactile books. I'm very delighted that Ailey's worked with us for a few years at the Book Festival now, putting on learning disability friendly events and also creating learning disability friendly resources for us this year, which you can find in our learning resort website. Ailey.
Thanks very much, Catherine. And I'm very pleased to be here. So I'm director of My Kind of Book. As Catherine said, it's a recently founded social enterprise community interest company, and we promote and create inclusive books, particularly for children with complex additional needs. So our belief at My Kind of Book is that every child can enjoy a good story, but in order for them to enjoy stories, we have to make sure that books and stories are accessible for every child. And sometimes I feel a bit like the book world, the children's book world, is like a 1970s high street, like the kind of high street that I would see when I was growing up. 1 or 2 ramps into shops, but apart from that, not a huge amount of effort going into being inclusive, possibly because people just don't quite understand what is needed yet in order to produce inclusive books. So today I'm really happy to be here and to be alongside other people who are really committed to creating inclusive books and inclusive book events. And I'm going to start by talking about inclusive books and then move on and talk a little bit about inclusive book festival and other book events. So I will start off by just saying a little bit about how I came to found My Kind of Book. As Catherine said, I've worked for many years as a storyteller, a sensory storyteller, so using sensory props to tell stories and working mainly with children and adults with complex additional needs, including people with profound and multiple learning disabilities. A lot of my work has been in special schools, and I've always created story resources for other organisations, so story kits with scripts and props to enable other people to tell stories. But one particular school, Oakland School here in Edinburgh, asked me to create a set of sensory books for their pupils. All their pupils have complex additional needs. And this was a few years ago, and when they asked me to do this, it got me thinking about why they asked me to do it. It's quite unusual for a school to commission resources to be made, particularly books to be made. But the staff at Oaklands told me that they really struggled to find books that were suitable for their children. And when I asked around in the other special schools that I was working in, I heard the same story. It was really difficult for teachers to find books that were engaging and accessible for children with complex additional needs. So that began my journey, and after a few twists and turns, I came to found my kind of book to create these books that are missing from the shelves. So the books that we created then were tactile handmade books. Next slide, please. I created two sets. One was a set of seasons books. Next slide. And the other was a set of books about historical figures. And these were really enjoyed by the children and appreciated by the staff, but they were very expensive to produce. So that's been another learning curve for me, is to learn how to produce books which don't cost a fortune to create and which can be reproduced more easily. So my kind of book is now right at the very beginning of that journey. We're just about to produce our own very first books. Next slide, please. And these have come out of a project that I've been working on with Wigtown Book Festival, with the artist and illustrator Kate Leaper. And they've also come out of a project that's been funded by Creative Scotland, in which we've been researching in special schools how teachers who are working with children with complex additional needs adapt books to make them accessible for their pupils. So some of the things that we've discovered whilst doing this research would make illustrators, authors and book designers and publishers probably sit down and weep, because all kinds of things are done to picture books in order to make them accessible for children with complex additional needs. Next slide, please. So here we can see an old Shirley Hughes book, which has been, well, it looks like censored, but it's actually just been edited to make the text a little bit shorter. It wasn't that Shirley Hughes wrote anything inappropriate in this book. So you find when you look in the libraries of schools with pupils with complex additional needs, they often have text that's been shortened. They sometimes will have painted over illustrations, except for one small part. They will have taken pages out of books. They will have enlarged illustrations. They've added pages into books. All kinds of creative and innovative ideas in order that their children can access mainstream picture books. We found when we were doing our research that 90% of teachers who work with children with complex additional needs say that they need to adapt picture books in order that their pupils can access them. So 90% are saying that, which just, I think, goes to show the need that is out there for accessible books. I think that we can all learn a lot from these teachers' creative approaches to making books accessible, and also to making book reading accessible. So I certainly feel that I've learnt a huge amount from going in and out of special school classrooms. And some of the things would, some of the tips that I've got from teachers have really informed how I have arranged the events that I've taken part in at book festivals and other book-related events. So, for example, tips from teachers might be things like using lots of repetition. Repetition is one of the most important things to children with additional needs. Repetition of stories, repetition within stories. Using short bursts of time for concentration and then allowing time for relaxation in between. So the relaxation doesn't mean that the event has to come to a stop, but it might be time when you listen to music, or when you blow bubbles, or when you sing a song, some kind of activity that doesn't require such concentrated attention for a little while. It might mean creating an inclusive event, might mean creating a very short event, and it might mean creating a very small event, both of which can be quite problematic for programmers, I know, but could be necessary. Or another thing that many book festivals could consider is to have drop-in events. If you have a drop-in event, then you take away the pressure from a family of having to arrive at a certain place at a certain time, and they can maybe pick the moment that suits their child best to enter the event. And then the last thing that I've learned from teachers and from performing myself is the importance of the sensory element. And I know that other people will be talking about this in this event. There are lots of experts here, but including a sensory element in a book event, I think is the one thing that can really transform it into being a really inclusive event. So I've always included props in my performances. Next slide. I've got many of these kind of little friends that help me. So these guys have all got different smells inside, so they get passed around to help tell the story. But props don't have to be handmade or expensive. They can be very simple. Next slide. So these are the resources that go along with the Chris Riddle and Neil Gaiman event, which Catherine mentioned. I've created inclusive resources to go alongside that event. So things like carrots and pineapples and spoons in a jar, all of these things have got a sensory interest for a child. And they act as a little invitation, a little surprise, in order to invite somebody to engage with what's happening around them. They can also help with the meaning of a story for people. So if the story is about a carrot and you've got a carrot in your hand, then the meaning becomes very clear. But for many people, the sensory objects and experiences actually become the story. So if the sensory objects can carry the story along in a narrative arc, then they create a whole sensory package for a child, which alongside the language, the sensory language, is just there to be enjoyed. Just coming back to books before I finish, we're delighted to have just received funding from the Creative Innovator Fund here in Edinburgh to enable us to do more detailed research in special schools as to how people are editing and adapting picture books. And we're going to use that research as a basis to create a toolkit for authors, illustrators, book designers and publishers, and everybody working in the world of books, in order that people can begin to create more inclusive, even more inclusive books. Next slide, please. And we believe that there's always going to be a place for very specialized books, very sensory books for children with the most complex additional needs. But there are many things that mainstream publishers can be doing right now, some of them very simple things, to make books more accessible. And our vision is that there is a very long bookshelf stretching off to the horizon. And on that bookshelf, there are books for every single child. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ailey. What a wonderful start to the event. Our next case study is going to be from Kelsey Acton. Kelsey is a neurodivergent access consultant, researcher and choreographer. She's currently the Inclusive Practice Manager at Battersea Arts Centre, who worked with an organisation called Tourette's Hero and the social model of disability to become the world's first relaxed venue. Please tell us more about that, Kelsey.
Hello, and thanks so much for having me. I'm Kelsey, my pronouns are she, her. I'm a white woman in my mid-30s with dark wavy hair that's scraped back today and clear glasses. And as I go through, I'll be providing descriptions of the images on my slides. So today I'm going to talk a bit about Battersea Arts Centre's approach to relaxed performance and relaxed events, and more generally, how BAC approaches accessibility for learning disabled people. So this is a photo of BAC on the occasion of President Trump's first visit to the UK. BAC is a 3-story Victorian building, colored sand and rust. The building is draped in banners, including one reading, "Build bridges, not walls," another, "Women are powerful," and a large one spelling out Battersea Town Hall's motto, "Not for me, not for you, but for us." A crowd of people gather below. This magical place is a home for radical artistic ideas, and it's also the world's first relaxed venue. Relaxed venues is a methodology that was developed by Tourette's Hero in collaboration with BAC. Image of our BAC's artistic director, Tarek Iskander, a Middle Eastern man, and Jess Tom of Tourette's Hero, a white woman who uses a wheelchair, at the launch of BAC as a relaxed venue. They are on a stage dramatically lit by yellow, blue, and green lights. Tourette's Hero is a company founded by Jess Tom and Matthew Portney to celebrate and share the creativity and humor of Tourette's in an accessible way. Jess and Tourette's Hero have been a major force here in England and worldwide, pushing the performing arts to be more accessible. In 2015, with the support of Arts Council England, Jess came to BAC to develop the relaxed venue methodology. The methodology takes the guiding principles of relaxed performances and applies them across an entire organization, embedding access into everything we do. This includes a commitment to making at least 90% of our performances we present relaxed, although most seasons that number is higher. And it's worth noting here that there's a few different versions of relaxed performance out there, and BAC uses Tourette's Hero's version of relaxed performance. So in our relaxed performances, you have a really clear explanation of what a relaxed performance is for audience members when they book. You have pre-show information describing what to expect from the show, and this is often in the form, ideally, of an easy read guide. Staff who take an inclusive approach from start to finish. An introduction at the start of the show to remind audiences that it's a relaxed performance, and giving anybody who needs to move or be noisy the freedom to do so. And audience members should always be able to leave and come back at any point. Consideration given to sound and lighting event levels to take into account sensory sensitivities. A clear plan for how any complaints from audience members will be managed. And ideally, a quiet space outside the auditorium where people can go during the show if they need to. So you'll notice that while this model talks about consideration of sound and lighting levels, it doesn't require changes to sound and lights. At BAC, we use sensory adaptive to refer to performances that have been adjusted for sensory sensitivities. In our ordinary relaxed performances, we rely on really good pre-show information to allow audiences to decide if a performance is for them. So what I want to spend some time on is thinking about who we assume our events and spaces are for. A young white child with a halo of blonde hair holds a spoon. In front of them is a white mug. The background is warm shades of red and brown blurred out. So when you stick relaxed performances into a Google Images search engine, You come back with picture after picture after picture of children. This is because relaxed performances, at least in England, were developed mostly with children's theatre. Of the original performances in the Relaxed Performance Project, 6 were explicitly children's shows. The other 2 were Romeo and Juliet and Curious Incident of a Dog in the Nighttime. And this is great. Disabled children deserve to be able to access the arts and culture along with their friends and family. But with very few exceptions, most of us disabled kids grow up to be disabled adults. And then there's a significant lack of opportunities for us to engage with arts and culture that's accessible with us. This is only heightened for learning disabled people. I don't want to dwell on this, but I want to say here that it's important to note that learning disabled people are some of the most marginalized of disabled people. They have less access to work, meaningful decision-making about their lives, healthcare, the list goes on. This was really brutally illustrated by the fact that for the last 18 months, learning disabled people have been 4 times more likely to die of COVID than the rest of the population. So this is one of BAC's many installations, a mirror surrounded by metal vines that reads in blue hologram letters, "Tell me the truth you need to hear." So what is ultimately revolutionary about BAC's approach is not what we're doing. Lots and lots of venues do relaxed performances and events. What is revolutionary is how much we do. When we try to have all our performances relaxed, when we have a chill-out space available anytime the building is open, when we provide visual guides for as much of the season as possible, when we offer every performance on a pay-what-you-can basis, we are assuming that learning disabled people will be in our audiences and our building on a daily basis. We're assuming that they are full citizens who want to engage with high-quality radical art that provokes social change. And this isn't to minimize the barriers that learning disabled people face engaging with BAC's programs. These include lack of access to safe, easy transportation, attitudinal barriers that say learning disabled people aren't interested in the law of the performance BAC programs. And to be fair, some people do just want to go see a panto, and that's absolutely okay, and they should have access to that. But I believe that absolutely everyone who wants access to BAC's art should have access as much of the time as possible. Which brings me to how I really keep learning and growing in my access practice to make her building a program more accessible to learning disabled people. So this is Husni Hassan, or DJ, a young man dressed in a gray jumper and gray track bottoms. He's posing, arms lifted and bent. A virtual reality headset obscures his face. The way I learn and grow is by having learning disabled artists working with us regularly. DJ works with Access All Areas, among a number of companies. He's very busy. And Access All Areas is a truly exceptional learning disabled theatre company here in London. BAC has ongoing relationships with Access All Areas, Blink Dance Theatre, and Heart and Soul. Having learning disabled artists in the building on a regular basis lets me get to know them, see how the building's working for them. It also lets me see how they're working and how they're innovating to make things accessible for themselves and their audiences. And it lets me learn about the issues they're passionate about and the ways they want to change the world through their art. I totally want you to take from BAC and assume that learning disabled people will be at all your events. But I'd also say that some of the best ways to make your events accessible to learning disabled people is to put them in charge. Where are your learning disabled authors? Can you bring in learning disabled folks to curate a program of work they're passionate and excited about? The people who will know the most about access for learning disabled people are always inevitably learning disabled people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kelsey. You've given us so much to think about there. That was wonderful. We're going to move on to our third case study, which is from Heather Malloy. Heather is an author and multisensory storyteller. She's a former ASN teacher, but she now works as programme lead for PAMIS. And as part of that role, she works alongside an art collective who call themselves the Arts End of Somewhere. Unfortunately, the participants of the Arts End of Somewhere weren't able to join us today, but they've very kindly put together a short video where some of them will discuss the work that they've been doing recently, and Heather's going to introduce that for us. Thanks, Heather.
Thank you, Catherine, and good afternoon, everybody. It's lovely to be here this afternoon. As Catherine said, I'm the programme lead for PAMIS, which stands for Promoting a More Inclusive Society. And as a charity, PAMIS works solely to support people with profound learning and multiple disabilities and their families. And PAMIS have been very innovative for many years, working with multisensory stories. And I came to the organisation about 2 years ago now and met the fabulous arts collective, the Arts End of Somewhere, who are also PAMIS volunteers. So I'm here representing them today. And the Arts End of Somewhere all have their own different additional support needs and learning disabilities. And they've spent the last couple of years learning about multisensory stories and how they can help bring to life stories for people with profound learning and multiple disabilities. And they're in a really unique position to understand what barriers there are for people with different disabilities and learning disabilities. And about 12 months ago, the group were given the opportunity to publish their first multisensory picture book, which I'm really pleased to say is being launched online as part of the Edinburgh International Book Festival. So that's another event to look out for. And what's really special about the group is that everything that they do is informed by people who have profound learning and multiple disabilities. It's working with them, working together about finding the props that will help to bring the stories to life. And the group are publishing a story called The Kipford Mermaid. And I should say that we are based in Dumfries and Galloway, and this is a local folk story. And what the group really wanted to do is to take a local folk story and make it accessible to other people who might not ordinarily have access to those local stories. And in preparation for this event today, I spent some time with some of the members of the Arts End of Somewhere. So there are 7 altogether who are the authors and illustrations of the Kipford Mermaid picture book. And I sat down with 3 of them and just chatted to them about their experiences of books at school, at home. Had they ever been to a festival before for books? Had they felt that that was somewhere that would be welcoming to them, that they would feel comfortable attending? And also we talked about why they were wanting to create this book and what was important to them, and how they hope the multisensory book that they're publishing will help people with profound learning and multiple disabilities and other people with additional support needs to access stories and to share their own stories as well. So I won't say any more just now, but I'm going to pass you over to Katie Wright, Zoe Charlesworth and Faye Katanak, who are going to share some of their thoughts with you now. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Kira.
Hi, my name is Zoe Charlesworth.
Hi, I'm Faye Katanak.
My first question to you guys is how do you feel about reading and about books in general? Do you enjoy reading? Have you had a lot of experience reading, like in school? Were you encouraged reading or not so much?
I didn't eat at school, but when lockdown happened, I'm on I like books to read, like children's books, like Michael Mabugo, David Williams books. I'm actually on my 37th book now.
That's amazing. And do you mind me asking why at school you didn't read very much?
I kind of got bullied and lost all my confidence for eating or anything speaking English. I only spoke when I had to, but no more than that.
And that's changed now for you?
Yeah.
So, have any of you ever been to any events like, these events where they're like book signings, where you go, you meet the author, you listen to a bit of book, what's those kind of storytelling events?
I kind of have.
Okay, can you tell us about
I think there was one of the Winter Book Festivals, and one of the authors, I got a book and she signed it. It was one of the books they had on display on the day.
that? And was it a good event? Did you feel
Yeah, it was a
comfortable?
good event.
Good, that's
I
really
think it
good.
was a school trip.
Ah, okay.
Not been on any signing days. No.
No? Do you think there's a reason for that? Do you think it would be for you?
They
Or?
didn't know where to look, and they didn't know anything about book signing.
Then, thinking about you, your own personal experiences, is there anything that you can think of that would make it easier or better for you to go and go to some of these festivals?
It just depends on if there's ramps or there's stairs or anything like that, because stairs is just no good for me. And so as long as it's like there's ramps and stuff like that and accessible transport, then yeah.
I would love to go.
You'd love to. So, how is there anything that you think? Well, I suppose what I'm trying to get at is there anything that's kind of stopping you or holding you back from going? Is it support? Is it that you'll get there and it'll be really overwhelming? There'll be too many people. Is it like actually it's just the transport? If you were able to have someone take you, no issues.
I think if you're going on the likes of Edinburgh, that is quite far. So if I had someone to take me, or we found a way of getting there, I probably would go. Like, pretty sure.
I feel that I need someone to stay with me at the minute where I've not been anywhere for 18 or 19 months. So.
Okay. Your experience putting the story and book together, why you wanted to be part of it, and what you hope this book is going to do for other people?
Well, we all came together to, we started off as like an unusual multi-sensory project we do in lockdown, and we set it through Zoom, and we recorded and uploaded to social media websites. And then we decided to make it as a format of a book. So it was different compared to the one we've done before. So the ones we've done before. So we did all the pictures, and we used the same words that we had in the story, and we made more props. And we had a bit of help from many people that we were very thankful for, and we just made a book.
We had a lot of help with the pictures. Like there was women that actually sat on Zoom and talked us through like all the colours and what we had to do to make it effective and all that, and I really enjoyed that. And I think it'll help people with profound needs more, because a lot of people with profound needs, some people can't talk, and the way through communication for them is like touching and feeling and getting the sensory out of it basically. Definitely. Yeah.
I would love to make my mark on the world. To make my mark of the world in sense or stories, because I know a lot of people that it could help. My best friend in wheelchair all the time can speak to anything that would help so much.
And that's the arts end of somewhere, or some of the members of the arts end of somewhere, just sharing some of their thoughts about putting this book together.
Thank you so much, Heather, and thank you so much to the Arts End of Somewhere. And I should say that the Kipford Mermaid will be available to buy in the Book Festival's online bookshop, shop.edbookfest.co.uk, and very soon the learning resource that you mentioned, Heather, with some of the Arts End of Somewhere participants demonstrating the sensory story to accompany the Kipford Mermaid will be up on our learning resource site, which is learning.edbookfest.co.uk. Before we get into our panel discussion, I'm just going to say a little word on semantics. I use the term people with learning disabilities, and the Book Festival uses the term LD friendly to describe events that we have particularly kind of curated to be appropriate for people with learning disabilities. And if you're not familiar with the term PMLD, that stands for people with multiple learning disabilities. I know there are other terms that people use. And indeed, people with learning disabilities will use different terms and have preferences themselves. But I hope within this kind of space, we can accept that different terms are used, and as long as it is used with respect and kind of open questioning, that we'll be happy to use them. This event is very much not going to be about the Edinburgh International Book Festival and what have we've done. If anything, this is an opportunity for me to steal ideas from other organisations and experts. But I did just want to say a very brief word at the start about kind of how the Learning Disability Friends events at the Book Festival and kind of a few of the relationships came about. And in my notes, it says the story of Pat. And this refers to a woman called Pat Graham, who I think should be watching today, and she's the governor of PAMIS. And she is a big supporter of the book festival, big fan. But I think like 5 or 6 years ago, she wrote an open letter to the Scotsman newspaper addressed to Nick Barley and the Edinburgh International Book Festival, accusing the book festival and saying that they had no events for people with learning disabilities, that they were not catered for. And people with learning disabilities very often loved books, and the book festival didn't cater to this audience. And this letter ended up in my desk, and I said, yes, okay, I'll reply to her, that's fine. And I ended up going up to Dundee to meet with her, feeling a bit apprehensive and feeling a bit defensive, because our book festival site was fully accessible and people with learning disabilities were very welcome to come to any events they wanted. We had everything from interactive picture book events to adult events. Why were they not coming? But I'm very happy to say that was the start of a kind of long and really fruitful relationship, particularly between the book festival and PAMIS, and then broadening out to other organisations, and has really been why we now have learning disability friend events in the programme and are having this event today, which did start out with the idea of an event from PAMIS showing authors how they could make their events and their work more accessible to people with learning disabilities. Maybe that's something we'll come back to in the future for another event. I'll pass on now to our panel, just to introduce some new people you're going to see on your screen. Alexandra Strick is an author and an advocate of authentic inclusion and diversity in books. She's one of the founders of Outside in World, which promotes books from around the world, and co-founder of Inclusive Minds, which is a collective for people who are passionate about inclusion, diversity, equality and accessibility in children's literature, and committed to bringing changing the face of children's books. We've also got Steve Antony. Steve is an author and illustrator of picture books, 7 of which have been nominated for the Create Greenaway Medal, and he's perhaps best known for his Mr. Panda series. Maureen Phillip is a multisensory storyteller and has worked with PAMIS for over 20 years in a research, development and family support capacity. She's worked with the Book Festival for, I think, the last 4 years, working alongside authors and illustrators to create learning disability friendly events. And we partnered up Alexandra, Steve and Maureen for an event just at the start of this week on Alexandra and Steve's wonderful book, You Can. So I hope they'll talk a little bit more about that later. We've also got Charlotte Riley Gibson. Charlotte's a musician and practitioner who works with Paragon Music, a Scottish charity who engage people of all ages with additional support needs in inclusive music and arts opportunity. Charlotte had helped to establish Paragon's inclusive programmes and performance events and trained staff in Paragon's inclusive arts practice and disability equality. Heather's also joined us. I've introduced her already, and I do hope that you've not seen the last of both Ailey and Kelsey. We can drag them back into the discussion if they want to be a part of that. So, as I said, we're not going to focus too much on the book festival, but I did want to start off, Alexandra, Steve and Maureen, by asking you to maybe reflect a little bit on the event that we had earlier in the week. Maybe one of you, I've talked enough, maybe one of you can tell us a little bit about that. And then just kind of honestly, how did you feel it was for all of you?
Shall I go first?
Yeah, okay.
So yeah, thank you for having us. I'm Alexandra Strick, as Catherine said, one of the people behind You Can, which is a new book which started very much with children, so started with their voices and has, we hope, involved them throughout. And Steve and I are really keen to continue to do so now as we get to the stage of promoting it and helping it to reach other children. We really want to make sure we reach all children. So the event that we held with Malloy on Monday, all about the book, and Malloy brought it to life for children by showing the audience resources and props. And it was overwhelming, I think, for myself and Steve, and it's almost the start of our learning journey, really, in how we can now take it forward. We'd love to build on this, and seeing her do that, seeing other people's reactions to the book, and seeing responses on Twitter was also amazing. Seeing people talk about the fact that we had a lovely comment from somebody who talked about the conversation that it kicked off between their 2 children, one of whom was neurotypical and one was on the autistic spectrum, and how it started to get them talking about the book, and that was amazing to see.
Yeah, it really was fantastic.
You worked with us over the last few years. Sorry, Steve, go on.
I'm so sorry. I was just going to say, first of all, I feel like I've learned so much already in the past like 20 minutes or however long we've been doing this for. This is so important, and Alex and I both learned so much from the event with Maureen the other day, which I thought was so successful. It was great to see all of the artwork that was created by some of the people that PAMIS support. And I've always been of the belief that picture books are far more than just ink on paper anyway. You can do so much with them. And, creating inclusive picture books is really important, but it's even more important to make those books accessible. And I really feel like the event with Maureen and PAMIS was a great example of that. And I'm looking forward to hopefully doing similar events moving forward.
Yeah. Right. Thanks very much, Alexandra and Steve. It was an absolute pleasure to work with you. You were both fantastic in the way that you embraced what the storytellers from PAMIS did. For me, it's quite, I'm not going to make any apologies for it. It's my passion in life. I'm compassionate about the people that I support. I'm passionate about the stories, compassionate about the storytelling, and there is just so many different ways that people with profound and multiple learning disabilities can access story and books. There's no one shoe fits all. And I think what we've done with the book festival over the years is shown that each event's been different, each event's brought in different elements. And for this event, it was fantastic because it was able to showcase that people with profound and multiple learning disabilities can access story through art, they can tell their own story through art, through the medium of art, and they had worked for the last 16 months with a wonderful artist who took them through. She's an art therapist, Ashlyn Wardle, and their art has just gone from strength to strength. So what happened was your book, Catherine suggested the book You Can. So I then am quite, and I have to say, I'm quite innovative and think, yes, you can do anything. So I thought about it and I thought, yes, we can definitely do this. So I set the task out to the art group and gave them the option, did they want to do it or did they not want to do it? And they went, yes, we do want to do it. So they came up with their own version of You Can. So it was almost like they took the book to tell their own stories about what they can do. And for me, that was a very powerful moment because they were able to say, I can. Normally people would say, well, what are your likes or what are your dislikes or what do you like to do? But they took it and they said, I can do this. And that was really powerful, actually. So will I show some slides from the artwork? Yeah. So this is the first slide. It was developed by a couple of the artists in the group, and I think their pictures were available on the day, which actually, I have to say, made them very, very proud to be up on the stage. So in this one, I can do karate. I think that's quite a powerful image of Jack in his wheelchair doing his karate, and the same with the others there. So they really did get into the story. They really did think about it and think about, what they did. This is young Jack doing his karate, and later on you'll see Jack when he's older. So this is a couple of them saying that I can do swimming, I can splash, and again this is their young selves doing this. I can just, and the same with this one. I can play instruments and listen to music. This is I can play video games, shop till I drop, and sit ski. So that I can play video games is Jack as he is now. So this is what he likes to do now. But he doesn't just say, I like to play video games. He says, I can play video games. So he's telling his story through his artwork, which is it was just amazing. It was just amazing for them to have that opportunity. And what it did do, I agree with Steve, the feedback on Twitter was amazing. And there's other groups come forward now to say, can we use You Can? And can we say what we want to do? So it's opened an avenue for them to tell their story, their personal story about what they can do. So thanks very much. It was great. But also, I know later in the conversation there's topic about using music and drama. There's storytelling for people with profound and multiple learning disabilities is amazing. You can use any medium it takes for people to access that book or that story. So I'll be quiet now because I could go on all day.
Don't worry, never be quiet. I was going to say, we've paired you up with different authors and illustrators over the last few years, but Alexandra and Steve have been particularly open to collaborating and really working together to create an event, which is what I think has been so special. So thank you to all. But I'm now going to ask Charlotte and Heather a question. Charlotte, I think literature and book events have a lot to learn from other art forms, particularly theatre and music, as we heard earlier from Kelsey, the amazing work that she's doing at Battersea Art Centre, in terms of learning disability friendly and relaxed performances. Charlotte, can you tell us a little bit about what you do at Paragon, and particularly your recent project with the Arts End, where I believe you're adapting Alice in Wonderland?
Yeah, thank you for the introduction, Catherine. I mean, you covered it really, but Paragon essentially are a registered Scottish charity, and we support emerging artists to create inclusive opportunities for people to create and perform their own music. So day to day, we identify the barriers that are often people who have additional support needs can typically face when trying to access the arts, and we break these barriers down. So that means finding out specifically what support needs people have, if they have any, and then put measures in place to ensure that everyone can participate on an equal level. We are predominantly musicians, but we love working in a multidisciplinary setting. So we've worked with dancers, visual artists, and of course with theatre, and that, we've collaborated with PAMIS and with the Arts End of Somewhere group over the last couple of years in a couple of different ways, most recently digitally over the last year and a half, but also in person with performances and with connecting our young artists. I think, as so many people have said, storytelling is just so universal and can take so many forms. And I think for us, that seems the multi-sensory, multidisciplinary approach just seems to be the most accessible way to create these inclusive events. So, some people might want to interact with them quietly, some people with touch, with movement, with sound. And I think having these different options and different partners involved just, ensures that it can be inclusive, interactive and memorable. I think, Heather and I, through our work, are very aligned, Paragon and PAMIS, in our approach to, it being person-led and actually empowering people to make decisions about the artwork that they want to create and share, and the creative journey that they go on. So, I think there are so many natural connections, and I think that I think it's just about finding out who people are and what their aspirations are, and trying to have as many different kind of mediums there for people to tell their story as possible. Heather, I don't know if you want to say a bit more about the actual Alice production, because I know that that's very much your kind of, creation.
Yeah, thank you. I think you expressed it really beautifully, actually. So, the theatre side of things, theatre is more my background, theatre and writing. And when I first met the Arts End of Somewhere, they're so passionate about storytelling, and they love doing the multisensory stories. But what they love, I think, more than anything else, is their drama. Is drama and dancing and singing and being on a stage. And storytelling is such a fabulous art form, and it's one of our oldest art forms. And what's so fabulous is that you can share a story in so many different ways. And so once the group had learned about multisensory stories and telling stories, it was about finding a way of incorporating the drama and the dance and the singing into that. And the idea for Alice came about last year, actually, during Edinburgh International Book Festival. And PAMIS were working with an author, Dunya Jogan, on a book called Felix After the Rain. And actually, one of the benefits of lockdown and using things like Zoom and stuff is that we were able to, so a group from PAMIS, working with the musician Fiona Sharp, created a musical sort of soundscape to that book. And it was just an amazing moment to put a film together where it was sharing the narration of that story, the multisensory props, but also having people with PMLD on stage, front and center, because it's not just about them being an audience. It's about them being performers, being storytellers, and having their own stories to tell. And it's been lovely, actually, to see UCAN develop and attending the event on Monday and seeing the Art for Wellbeing group and their story, and see how this is continuing. So that's where Alice came about. It was about, okay, we want to kind of use theatre to bring Alice in Wonderland to life in a multisensory way. But we also want people with PMLD to be the actors and the performers on the stage as well. And that got me to thinking that, okay, if we're going to have sound as part of that, then who better to create some of the soundscape and the music than somebody like Paragon? Because their musicians will be composing their own musical pieces that will then accompany those scenes. And we're also collaborating and working with some of the activity resource centres down in Dumfries and Galloway as well, and their members are learning about multisensory stories and creating their own scenes. And the idea is that we'll all bring the whole thing together and have this production of Alice, which will have people in the audience from all different backgrounds, with who will all be multisensory. We'll have people on stage, and it's just the idea that it shouldn't be performer, an audience, storyteller, an audience, that it's a community and it's a shared experience for everybody, and that's what storytelling is, and that's what it should be. So we're just starting our rehearsals and looking forward to moving that forward over the next few months.
I think just to add to what Heather's explained, that it's very much about trying to help to change audience perceptions as well about artists with disabilities, and about actually showcasing the very real ability and passion that our artists and storytellers have. And working with professionals in the arts industry, and having high production values in our performance, but actually really showcasing these incredible talents that our artists have got, and trying to open that up to an audience.
Yeah, and so many of us have we all bring our own different skills into it, and it's fabulous. For me, like even just today, this morning, we were rehearsing something, and the group will say lines and they'll change things, or they'll react a certain way to a sound, and it's all led by them. And we're going to be working with lighting and sound technicians and people doing set, and so they'll be teaching their skills to our performers. Our performers will be helping them to raise their understanding and awareness. And I think, I'm sure this will be spoken about throughout this event, but that's really important, is that, we all bring different skills and experiences, and in order to move forward, and I think Kelsey said this really well as well, is about working together and learning those skills in order to move forward with accessibility and to be truly inclusive.
That brings us on really nicely to something I was going to bring up next, which was representation. Like you say, Charlotte, kind of putting people on the stage, showcasing what people can do. And Steve, I wanted to ask you about your book that we've not even mentioned yet, Amazing, which I know had meant quite a lot to some people that we have watching in the audience. And I know you were compiling a list, and Pat Graham is compiling a list of books that feature characters with disabilities and with learning disabilities. And, that list may not be as impressive as we wish it was. But Steve, can you kind of briefly tell us about Amazing and what brought you to write that book, and what response you've had to it?
Sure, thank you. So You Can, I think, is the 21st book I've illustrated. Amazing was the first kind of proper book, as in beginning, middle, end. I saw it as a potential picture book, and I showed it to publishers years ago before any of my other books published. So I'm quite lucky in that most of my books have been quite successful. Amazing was the first one, and for some reason publishers weren't as kind of enthusiastic as I would have liked for them to be about that particular book. And I'm so glad it did end up getting published, but it ended up being my, I think, 17th book that was published. And it was partly inspired by my time. Sorry?
A young boy who's in a wheelchair. Just to give that kind of background to everyone. I didn't actually mention that.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So the book features a boy who's a wheelchair user, and he's the main character of the story. And the story isn't about the boy being in a wheelchair whatsoever. It's completely incidental. And incidental inclusion is very important, I feel. And it was partly inspired by my time working as a special needs support worker at Swindon College. I worked in the art department and I supported lots of pupils with their work. And then I left the job to become a full-time illustrator and author. But that certainly did inform my work, and it's been so wonderful to see the response from people who have read the book, and yeah, it really does mean a lot to me.
Thank you so much. I know it does mean a lot to people here. We're almost kind of running out of time already. I'm sorry, I'm not moving through questions as fast as I wanted to, and I do want to make sure we have time for questions at the end. I did want to bring up the pandemic briefly. As I said, Maureen's worked with us over quite a few years at the Book Festival, and obviously up until last year, all of our LD-friendly events were in person and had a lot of sensory aspects. Last year, everything was pushed online, and in a way that makes things more accessible because people, particularly people with learning disabilities, can stay at home and take part in events, particularly if travel or buying tickets is an issue. But obviously that kind of very sensory aspect, which a lot of us have brought up how important that is, has been kind of slightly taken away, as has the community feel that I really value in events in general as well. I wonder if any of you had anything to say on that, about the kind of the effect on the pandemic and the positive and the negatives there, and also to say that people with learning disabilities have been in a real way in danger over the last year.
Maureen. Well, I can say a little bit about that. Yeah, it has got its pluses. It has got its pluses. For the group of people I work with, some of them would never manage the journey to Edinburgh, or would be with a struggle to get there in time to actually enjoy the atmosphere of the book festival. So for these people, it's been great to have it online actually, because they couldn't have managed the journey, as you pointed out. But with the sensory element, last year, I suppose, with it going online was good because we brought in music into it. And what that did, as Heather said, was open up the opportunity for people with profound disabilities, not just to be recipients of the story, but to be active participants in it. So for them, that gave them about a 6-week, 7-week project to work on, and how they work with Fiona, the musician, to see how they would develop that. So there was ways that we could get round that. I mean, and then we produced a booklet for people that weren't in the immediate area, that we produced a booklet of the story with suggestions for props that you could make if you needed the props to access the story better. So we produced a booklet for that. So I think for PAMIS moving forward, I think it's been quite a big step forward actually in the way that we will produce stories in the future. So that's been that was the positive. The negative was, I suppose, for people that were local to Edinburgh, and the schools in particularly, to come along to the event. I suppose they didn't get that experience, but it was quite good. And the same with local festivals. I know that down in Dumfries and Galway, Heather was able to put little boxes of sensory items to go with the story and deliver it to the people in the local area. So that's another way that we got round of it. That ultimately increases the cost. So the pandemic, I suppose, in one way has increased the cost of making a multisensory story. But if you give out a booklet, actually people were happy to take the booklet and look for things that they had around the house and actually sit down together and make the items. So for me, it was a positive in a way that people could sit down and do it together. And by sitting down and doing it together, you got more involved in the story. And that repetition that's important in the story was continued over a period of weeks. Plus, they had the story after the event. So it wasn't just turn up, have the story at the event and go home. You had the story to work with over time. So it was a valuable resource. So that's been a positive. for me out of the pandemic.
In a way, there's a lot for creativity for carers and people at home. Something that I was going to say, and I'm sorry, Alex, but I'm a firm believer in the fact that once a book is written, it no longer belongs to the author, it belongs to everyone else. And I think a real theme of what a lot of you have been talking here is about that, and creating resources and editing the books, scribbling out the bits that you don't like and adding in textures and whatever else is a real creative process for people. Alex, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to add to what Maureen said, that I think in some ways it's been a very empowering time for people, and it reminded me of what she was just saying about that brilliant project by Nicola Grove that's been started up, the Surviving Through Story project, where young people with learning disabilities have been able to share their own stories of COVID, their experiences of COVID, on an amazing resource, and things like that have sprouted up and given people a real chance to talk about their experiences. Have been, I think, one of the plus sides of the last 12 to 18 months.
Yeah, we've had a sort of similar experience. Oh no, on you go. Sorry.
No, go on, Charlotte. Go on. Sorry.
No, I was just going to actually just to add as well to what Maureen and Alexandra have said, that I think in some way, for people who perhaps physically can't get to the some of our programs and workshops, if they maybe don't have a care package in place, if they don't have access to actually get on transport, then actually the online world has been incredibly empowering. But really, we've tried to see this as a chance to for us, the onus is on us. How do we make it accessible? So we've been kind of upskilling ourselves, sourcing funding for equipment and instruments to get out to people, trying to make it as fun and creative as possible with YouTube live streams and things like that. But we'll keep an element of the online world going, because it does create that level of accessibility. But at the same time, not everyone has been able to access it. It's that kind of one sensory kind of approach, which doesn't work for everyone. So we'll take the best bits.
Yeah.
It's lovely to count the positives, though, you're right. I'm going to move on to questions from our audience, because there are such lovely and insightful questions coming in, better than mine. So I don't know who it's from, but I've got a question. Do you think the stereotype of the publishing/bookish community putting emphasis on traditional definitions of intelligence turns parents of children with learning disabilities off of encouraging their children to interact with books and storytelling? Quite a big one, to be honest. Who would like to start?
Will I say something? I was just going to say that I think that's actually very true, and something that I've found when I've been doing training with people is that I often ask people, if I'm teaching storytelling, I often ask people to think back and remember being read to or having stories told to them as a child. And the thing that's really striking is that almost nobody, and if you're a writer or illustrator, you should probably cover your ears at this point, because almost nobody remembers the contents of the books. The thing that people remember are the emotions, the closeness, and the relationships. So they'll talk about, cuddling with grandma when she was reading, or snuggling up in bed at bedtime with a book with their mum or something like that. But it's always to do with the engagement and the relationship rather than the actual contents of the book. I would say that as a society in general, we really overestimate the importance of the intellect, and that actually for all of us, when we read or hear stories, it's not the content that's necessarily that important to us. There's something else happening. It's to do with the emotions and the music. But we just tend to assume that it's the contents. And it's difficult to get past that because we put so much importance on the intellect. But I think that once we can get past that, it just opens up the whole world as to how you view stories.
Heather.
I was just going to add to what Ailey said. Touches on this slightly, but it's often assumed that people who have learning disabilities won't want to look at books that are written for adults. And won't want to look at accessible versions of things like Macbeth, for example, and other types of texts. Equally, there are many adults that I work with who love children's books, and I think that's where assumptions about intellect come into it, because I'm in my early 30s and I love children's books more than anything, and yeah, I'm the child that never grew up, and I think that's a really important point as well, is that it's people make these assumptions about age and where intellectually we should be at certain ages and certain points, and then make assumptions based on that. And I think publishers need to realize that isn't quite the fact, and they shouldn't always be making those kinds of assumptions about what people will like based on their intellect and their age alone.
When Pat Graham met with me that first time, she brought pictures, I hope you don't mind me saying this, Pat, of her daughter, who is an adult with PMLD, reading books to try and kind of convince me that adults with learning disabilities love books. She didn't need to convince me in that way. I very much, I don't know if I knew that already, but I was very quick to believe that. But clearly there were barriers that were in place, at least for book events, if not for books themselves. And I have to say, it chills my heart that I worry that in the same way as this question, the questioner is worrying that the kind of perception of intelligence in books puts people off. I worry that the perception of the book festival as a kind of place of learning and quiet, sensible events puts people off. And I think there's a lot more. We talk about it a lot, but there's a lot more that we need to do for that, really. I'm going to move on to the next question. How could the larger publishing industry go about adapting books for different levels of additional needs? We've kind of scouted around a few things that I think are of interest here, but would anybody like to say anything on that? Alex?
Just a quick one from me, just to say, I think the key is probably to not just divide books into two different categories of kind of mainstream books and special books, and kind of assume that everything's being covered by everyone else, because actually I think so many mainstream books, as was brilliantly said earlier on, so many mainstream books could be more accessible and inclusive. And actually, if you kind of started with that as your starting point on any book and tried to look at including as many different audiences and making it as accessible as possible at an early stage, then I think actually it's much easier then to open it out than to kind of think of these things as an add-on later on and trying to sort of, make tokenistic changes later on. I think there are so many not that difficult additions that you can make at an early stage, around size of font, around accessibility of the text and the links between the text and the illustration, making sure they're meaningful, all that kind of thing. That I think actually it would be brilliant to discuss this more and to help mainstream publishers understand those things, those changes that they can make, as well as finding ways to make existing books accessible through and inclusive through things like sensory storytelling, and brilliant people like Joe Grace, who I must mention, who I know is watching as well today, who runs the Sensory Project, which does incredible work in this area as well. So I think it's about having that whole spectrum of ways of making books more accessible, not just pigeonholing.
I think it's working in partnership as well.
Sorry, who was
Sorry,
that?
I was just going to say, I think it's just probably can seem slightly daunting, to know where to begin with making some of these changes. But like you say, I think it's working in partnership with organisations who are doing this every day, who know, who are talking to people who have a range of support needs in their families every day, and who between them, the organisation and the people who their sort of stakeholders are the experts and who know the kind of changes that need to be made. So clearly, for the relationship with the book festival and PAMIS has been a valuable one, and it's just one example. The kind of changes that can be made.
We've got a lovely question here that says, how could a festival like the Edinburgh International Book Festival go about both creating spaces that are friendly towards people with additional needs and make sure that reaches the interested parties? I'm going to dig into that a little bit more and ask if just in the last minute we can go very quickly around all 7 participants, and you can tell me one wish or one idea for the book festival or all book events that you would really like to see that you think would make a difference and improve accessibility and be a great idea for people with learning disabilities? Alexandra.
Oh, I think what Kelsey said earlier about starting with people with those lived experiences themselves and empower them, give the jobs to them, get them really, really actively involved from the start.
Totally, I agree. I like to hear their stories to empower the people I read to. They have their stories to tell, and I think there are ways that I hold work. I'll try and say it real quick. I hold story building workshops where I encourage people watching to use their senses, all of their senses, or whatever sense they, to get inspiration to start writing their story. And also hybrid events, I think, are great because it makes it easier for people to access. You necessarily, who can't necessarily commute to Edinburgh.
So I think maybe a bit of a boring answer, but maybe to start with details of programming and just things like length of events and what the space is like, noise levels outside, all those really quite tedious, boring details which can make a huge difference on the day. Sorry not to give a more inspiring answer.
No, I had a question about relaxed events that we didn't even get to. Kelsey, what's your blue sky thinking wish?
Selfishly, I mean all the things I said, but also selfishly, chill out spaces everywhere. Let's make them standard parts of buildings.
Awesome. Heather?
I think everybody's already said it really well, but I would say another thing would be to bring the events to the people. One thing that's been, again, really important has been having things online. But, if people are in hospital, if they're in their homes, wherever it is that they are, it's about engagement and outreach in that way as well. So finding ways of bringing those spaces directly to them. So they can experience it in a familiar place if that's what they need.
Charlotte.
My initial reaction was going to be, but just because it's so important to have people involved from the beginning. There's little kind of point in us sitting deciding ourselves. I think it's just so important to have people themselves who have lived experience of having additional support needs involved in the whole process and in deciding. I would say also, a multi-sensory, multidisciplinary approach and different mediums that people can interact with.
Finally, Maureen.
Yeah, no, I would agree with absolutely everything everybody said, but what I would say is people with profound and multiple learning disabilities are the best educators. So again, just have them along and see what they feel and see what they think, and just don't make assumptions that they wouldn't enjoy a short performance or a long performance, because if they're in a group, sometimes they can enjoy that special moment for up to 40 minutes. So, just don't make assumptions, I would say.
Thank you all so much. I've just given the book festival a big to-do list for the next year, haven't I? This has been such a wonderful discussion. I'm so sorry we didn't actually go on for another 10 minutes. It's not been enough time. But thank you so much. I have to say I'm going to be back in touch with every single person in this panel to talk to you more about potential partnership working and what more we can do over the next year and beyond. But sadly, that's all the time we have for now. Just to say, this event will be available on the Edinburgh International Book Festival's YouTube channel if MD wants to watch it again or if MD's missed it. If you enjoyed this Business of Books event and would like the Book Festival to programme more events like this going forward, then please drop us a line in the chat function or do fill in the short survey that there'll be a link to there. But all that's left for me to say is a big thank you to all of our participants today, and thank you to all of you watching at home. Thank you for your really insightful questions. I didn't even get to all of them. And also I wanted to thank my colleague Kate Seiler, who put together this this Business of Book strand, which I think is so important for the Book Festival to be working on. And the next one takes place next Friday, the 27th, and it is our cover design masterclass. Thank you very much for joining us today, and goodbye.